Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby.
Hello and welcome to Movies vs. Capitalism, an anti-capitalist movie podcast. I'm Frank Capello.
And I'm Rivka Rivera.
Riv, welcome back from holiday weekend. How was your Thanksgiving?
It was a good time. We just had to eat, and our dear friend set up a potluck and did most of the cooking and cleaned his place. It was perfect. It was relaxing. How about you?
Mine was solid. Went to Jersey, hung out with the family. A perfectly normal Thanksgiving. Nothing crazy to report. No even talks of politics at the table, which is something that my family loves to do. They're like, we're going to do antipasto, and then right after that, we're going to start talking about politics, and then we'll do mains.
Anti-political conversation.
But there was none of that this year, so there usually is. My family really likes to get into it.
Do you prepare yourself for that? Like, what is your... Like, do you prepare your... Like, are you someone who goes in sort of feeling like, okay, I have to prepare myself with... I don't know. Some people go in preparing their argument, preparing to have a real dialogue. Like, what is your prep for that?
A little bit. I have one rule with myself is that I don't bring up politics unless someone else does. And then once someone else does and then says something, that I don't agree with, then that's when I jump in.
You said that, and I just have to share the thought that popped into my head. I saw a meme or like a video recently where, because we both have pets and you accidentally step on a dog toy and it squeaks. Mm-hmm. And then the meme of the dog was like, you chose play. And then immediately they're like, you've chosen to play. That's what popped into my mind is like, you're just waiting. But if it comes up, you're like, so you've chosen political debate. Let's go.
Yep. That's exactly what the dynamic is. It's like as soon as someone says something, I'm like, well, I can't let this ignorant bullshit just go unaccounted for.
Sure.
I was preparing a little bit this year specifically. I had a feeling that someone would bring up everything that's happening in Israel and Gaza, and I was a little bit mentally preparing for it, but it didn't come up. Sometimes it get really wild. I remember one year, or maybe it was Christmas, one of my aunts, out of nowhere, just completely unprompted, said, I don't care what anybody says, Jesus was white.
Oh my God. That is so, you got to use that in the next thing you write.
It's something that it's like one of my most cherished memories. And I had so much fun with that. I was like, let's unpack that.
All I can say is Jesus Christ.
But you and I wanted to talk a little bit about everything that's happening in the world right now, not specifically what's happening in Israel and Gaza, but Hollywood's response to it, because this has been very much in the news. A number of actors, writers, entertainment types in Hollywood have been experiencing backlash, and some career backlash, like having lost work and representation over, mostly pro-Palestinian statements, social media posts that were then perceived or misrepresented by other people in the industry as being anti-Israel or anti-Semitic,
or conflating that being anti-Israel is therefore anti-Semitic. I think that's what's happening. The conflation. Yes. That if you are in opposition to what the government of Israel is doing, to the genocide being enacted, if you are even using the word potentially genocide to describe the truth of what you're witnessing, then there's a conflation that's anti-Semitic.
Exactly. And yes, and that's good that you pointed out that we're talking about the Israeli government specifically. But yeah, it's pretty scary. A lot of people are starting to call this like the new Hollywood blacklist, referring to the blacklist of the late 1940s and 1950s, in the height of McCarthyism and the Red Scare, and people being afraid of being labeled communists. And I've seen some people refer to what's happening right now as sort of like a neo-McCarthyism within the context of Israel and Gaza. So a few specific examples, and one of them we talked about on the pod already. In mid-October, one of CAA's top agents, this woman Maha Dakil, stepped down from her leadership roles at the agency after she made some Instagram posts essentially calling what the Israeli government is doing in Gaza a genocide. She ended up apologizing for those posts. And it should note that she's, a woman of color. So this is something that we've seen repeatedly as this has been playing out, is people of color being punished for their statements. Also at CIA, reportedly, a group of assistants threatened to walk out over the agency's treatment of her. At the same time, there were some agents who complained internally that she should be fired. And then separately, CIA has cut ties or fired one staffer and two clients over what they call incendiary anti-Israeli social media posts. The other big story that I'm sure a lot of people have seen is actress Melissa Barrera from the Scream franchise has been dropped from the franchise by Spyglass Media Group over her post. And then there was one specific post where she was criticizing Western media. Quote, "Western media only shows the Israeli side. Why do they do that? I will let you deduce that for yourself." A lot of critics have said that this is anti-Semitic, that she was floating the trope that Jews control the media, which I take issue with because very specifically saying Western media, it feels like a pretty strong critique of,
Yes.
the way that Western hegemony shapes all of these narratives. And something that I have noticed just in reading the coverage about this story is that many of these outlets, including this Variety piece that I'm pulling from, like flatly calls what she has said anti-Semitic. Just in a lot, and I've seen that in like, I think Hollywood Reporter stories, Deadline stories. As soon as someone has received backlash for a pro-Palestine post or a post critical of Israel, they are immediately labeled as anti-Semitic.
And I just want to pause on that for one moment because obviously in our conversations about films, we've spoken critically about anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic tropes. And I mean, we had that conversation, which maybe you heard and you did or did not agree with, about Maestro and the use of prosthetics on a non-Jewish actor to portray a Jewish character, and how, we've had extensive conversations about where these things really exist. Again, the conflation of having a anti-Israeli perspective in the face of this genocide, and just having you were allowed to disagree with a country's politics, that is not anti-Semitic. And there is something, this conflation is really concerning, especially for me as a Jewish person, when there are obviously there's real anti-Semitism that occurs, that goes up in moments when you have a country that uses the symbol of Judaism on their flag, and that is very heavily associated for some Jews, but not all. And yeah, just that conflation is what's happening here. And I just want to say, like, there's real anti-Semitism occurring, and it's really disturbing to see that terminology be weaponized.
The other big example that I'm sure people have seen is that actress Susan Sarandon was dropped by her agents at United Talent Agency for speaking out at a pro-Palestine rally. So these are just all examples about how power, especially power in the media and power in the entertainment industry, uses its influence to silence dissent from whatever the mainstream narrative is. And especially in a time like this, when people and children are still literally dying, and when it is so important now for people to use their voice, to use their platform, to use any levers of power that they have access to stop what is a genocide. Someone posted a New York Times headline from October 1st, 2001. This is 6 days before the invasion of Afghanistan. The New York Times headline was, and this was about a anti-war protest in advance of the invasion, but the headline read, "Marchers oppose waging war against terrorists." So that's another example of the way that this is being framed. Like, if you have any sympathy with Palestinians in Gaza, if you even dare to discuss the conditions that led to the rise of Hamas and why, and not justification, but an explanation for why Hamas has come to power, why Hamas has done what it did, that is seen as like you're sympathizing with the terrorists. You are you have no empathy for the Israeli citizens and for what they went through on October 7th. And it's so dangerous in like you're saying, this conflation in, I don't know, just making it so that people are afraid to fucking speak out about this shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think not only yes, there's such deep fear in speaking out. I've seen some of that affect like particularly friends who are non-Jewish or non-Palestinian, non-Arab, who are not necessarily connected in that sense to what's happening, just pull back and say things like, I just have to make some space. I'm going to do more listening because of this. And it's so scary. I'm like, and I've said, no, please, like, this is not actually the time. That's not what allyship should look like, because you can't, we have to fight being silenced all around, you know. I don't mind hearing dissenting opinions from other Jews, and I've had to be mindful of the framework in which I want to have those dialogues in a safe way, in a productive way. But I do think when we make it this black and white is, you know, and this goes back to the question of cancel culture, which I think there's a lot of complexity to that conversation. Adrienne Maree Brown talks a lot about calling people in as opposed to canceling them. And I just think, how can we call people in if we just are too afraid to even start the dialogue? Like, that's what scares me. People are too afraid now to even start the dialogue. Even to your point about, and I'm not saying this is happening at your Thanksgiving, but just I feel this sense of like, in the blacklisting is working and to some extent, because you start seeing like, wow, people are really being penalized for sharing how they feel. And we've seen a lot of people not being penalized, which I think is maybe where you were headed.
Yes, I just wanted to give a couple of quick examples of the converse, which is there have been some Hollywood types who have gone very far in the other direction in terms of their support for Israel in a way that crosses into Islamophobia or an endorsement of genocide in some ways. So there was Amy Schumer, who had posted a cartoon on her Instagram, and this was way back. This was like still mid-October, but she posted a cartoon to her Instagram calling Gazans rapists. And then the other one was Sarah Silverman shared an Instagram post which like fully supported Israel cutting off water to Gaza. And after people pointed out to her, they were like, hey, this is like an endorsement of genocide. She then walked it back and said, sorry, like I was so stoned when I posted this.
And while that's horrible, I think just we're seeing the grace of being able to, again, speak in draft. I think in this age of social media, in a moment with like this deep traumatic event, we're going to see people respond in the most, you know, we're seeing these are human beings. Again, the celebrity culture of putting everyone on this pedestal. These are not politicians. These aren't even activists. This is, you know, celebrities. And if they're reacting that way, I give her credit for being able to say, that's not what I meant. But she's not being penalized for it the way that I don't even know if I would agree with her being penalized for it, you know?
I don't know if I would agree with it either, but that's the point, is that like neither Amy Schumer or Sarah Silverman they've experienced a ton of internet outrage and online backlash, but other than that, neither of them have lost jobs or representation. So there is clearly an imbalance. There's clearly a double standard in the way that Hollywood, the business, is choosing to treat people who do not fall in line with what the Hollywood line is.
And even that, I just want to say, because obviously there's this anti-Semitic trope that Jews run Hollywood, which is, again, the thing with anti-Semitism that's so tricky is like a lot of the tropes have seemingly on the surface have to do with being privileged or wealthy. And, you know, that goes back to deep roots, which we can unpack another time. But that in itself doesn't mean that it's not a harmful, horrific trope. And even in this discourse, I fear that it makes that trope seem even worse when that's not, again, what's happening. This is about the United States imperial interest and the powers that be aligning with that. This is not about Jews running media. And I just want to like clarify that, because that's also that freaks me out too, seeing all this happen and being like, is that going to cause more anti-Semitism and hatred and attacks, you know?
Absolutely. And I think my analysis of the situation, in my opinion, dispels the anti-Semitic trope that Hollywood is run by Jews, and that's why there's been this backlash to these pro-Palestinian people. No, I think Hollywood is run by liberals. I think that is, in essence, what is happening here. I was reading, I didn't write this, but someone pointed this out in a piece that I was reading, that, you know, Hollywood has been very in lockstep over the last several years over different social issues, whether it's like the Time's Up movement, the Me Too movement, whether it's, rallying behind reproductive rights after the overturning of Roe v. Wade. These are very standard liberal social values, and more so than liberal, I should say neoliberal. And by that, I mean a political tendency that, yes, is more sympathetic to and supportive of, social issues like reproductive rights, like the Black Lives Matter movement. But other than that, also align themselves with entrenched power and with institutions and essentially backing the U.S. imperial project, aligning itself with capital and capitalists, not willing to go the extra mile of questioning how political economy and economic power and military power, all of that stuff is organized and how it's used in this country. So for me, that's what I think is happening in Hollywood specifically, is that these are a bunch of neoliberals who, yes, like when it comes to supporting Black lives, absolutely, but this schism that's happening right now it's just outside of the purview of like the neoliberal order and the neoliberal line is. I mean, they're basically in lockstep with like the Democratic Party, and Biden still up until this point has made it very clear, pretty much blank check to the Israeli government, unwavering support, shoulder to shoulder, no daylight. So I for me, that's more so what is happening here. And I think it's just like, like reading this New York Times headline from 2001, we look at this in hindsight and we're like, well, yeah, the war in Afghanistan was an absolute atrocity. The war in Iraq were an absolute atrocity. But of course, the people who were opposed to that at the time were being called terrorist sympathizers.
And I don't know. I feel this is just what's coming up for me right now, as I just, in my own personal experience in all this and moving through all of the dialogue and horrific events of the past month, I've also never felt more proud to be Jewish. Like, I just feel like I'm learning, and I think we've talked about before radicalizing moments. Like, I'm learning about this has been such a radicalizing moment for so many people, and in part for me it's just been really investigating like what it means. It's always been a question for me, like, what does it mean to be Jewish? And I've learned so much about what it means to be Jewish, what that ancestry of social justice is, and just watching groups like Jewish Voices for Peace, who have been blacklisted tremendously, and just the courage of all of those multi-generational organizers who have time and time again put their bodies on the line in the past month. All right, we had that conversation.
Yeah, we just wanted to touch on that because it's been a lot of what's been in the news for the last few weeks, and it intersects exactly with what we talk about here, which is, the entertainment industry, movies, capitalism, everything. All right, well, let's get to our questions, our mailbag episode. We had a bunch of listeners write in a bunch of questions. Thank you all so much for writing in. So our first question comes from Lane. What radicalized you both? Was there a pivotal moment?
I love this question. I feel like we were just kind of talking about it a little bit too.
A little bit. Do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, I guess. Well, we've talked about this a bit, and you know this, Frank, that I grew up in a very radical household, in the sense that both my parents worked for, or were writing for, the CLP, the Communist Labor Party newspaper, when they met, and they had their different backgrounds that brought them together, but they came together over a shared politic. And so that was the context into which I was born. But I would say,
yeah, you're like a legitimate red diaper baby.
Yeah, a
which
little
rules.
bit. Yeah, it was. I mean, it's great, but I also think there was also the radicalization of like just being born in New York and having access to all of that. Like, this moment in time, I just remember I just had a flash of how grateful I was that the last time I saw protests like this, we were protesting the Iraq War, and that was me in high school, and it was just, that was radicalizing in a different sense too, but I was just like lucky to have that cultural radicalizing. And then I love this question. As I was thinking about it, I think that there's just moments of you can be radicalized by a big situation, by a person, by hearing something. But for me, in my life, I think rock bottoms can be incredibly radicalizing. And, in my experience, a rock bottom is often this moment when an illusion or a delusion that's, maybe often requires an addictive behavior to maintain or uphold is smashed and broken. And so a few significant personal rock bottoms that were really radicalizing for me would be my food addictions, which just shattered a whole bunch of illusions about just the world. And I think that was directly relates to capitalism. And as a result of that rock bottom, my recovery and my healing, I think, was deeply radicalizing and required me to look for alternative ways of being and living. And that's definitely connected to my politics. So yeah, that's a few. And then of course there was bigger societal ones, such as the current moment we're in is incredibly radicalizing. How about you?
That's funny. It made me think about like the smaller moments in my life, which I hadn't been thinking about. When I first started working for my dad at his restaurant, my dad is a restaurant owner, if I've never said that on this podcast. Yes, he was a petty capitalist exploiting his workers, including me. He made me go to work for him when I was 9 years old.
9?
Yeah, 9.
That's
yeah,
so
9.
young.
Yeah, it's way
illegal.
Illegal. Child labor, for sure. Definitely didn't want to. He was like, "You're coming to work on Sundays." And I was like, "I just want to play with toys. Like, please just let me play with toys." Yeah, he put me on the register at his cheesesteak restaurant. It was the only job I could do in there that I wouldn't like hurt myself, because it was like I couldn't work the grill, I couldn't work the fryer. So it was just the register and then occasionally pour sodas. But later, when he had an Italian restaurant, I remember being a busboy, and my two immediate coworkers, the other busboys, were a couple of undocumented immigrants, a couple of Latino guys, Armand and Ivan. I'll never forget them. I was like 12, 13 and hanging out with these guys. And I remember learning so much about their lived experience as, living undocumented in the US, just how careful they had to be constantly, how much sidestepping of the government they had to be constantly, the fact that they couldn't have driver's licenses. So they had to ride their bikes everywhere. They had, fake Social Security cards that they paid into Social Security, but would never see any of that money back. I remember just spending so much time with those guys, and that was my first sort of like, damn, this is like really, like, this is fucking awful. This is fucking awful. Like the hoops that these guys have to jump through just to be able to live and work and, raise their families. And so that was a big one for me. And then, I don't know, just like watching movies, I glean a lot of my politics from my film habits. And like I said, Hollywood is a very liberal place. So a lot of, very liberal ideals. And then I think like what, the bigger moments, the Bernie 2016 campaign for sure. I think by that point I would consider myself like more of a progressive, but I remember hearing Bernie talk about just sort of like consolidated corporate power in it, and I was like, oh fuck, that's what it is. Those are the words for it. So that's when I started getting like way more into progressive politics, and I was like, what is democratic socialism? And then it wasn't until the pandemic and just watching the global response to the pandemic where I was like, okay, there's the machinery here, the way that this whole thing works is really fucking broken, or maybe not broken, maybe it's functioning as it's supposed to, but it does not work, and it's creating a lot of harm and devastation. So that's when I really dove into like theory and reading Marx and consuming as much leftist theory as possible. So that was when I sort of like really, really started being able to articulate my politics in a more coherent way.
Okay, our next one is from Marissa. What are both of your favorite movies, and how would you discuss them on the podcast?
Wow.
I love this. I know we've done one of your favorite movies.
Which one?
Back to the Future.
Oh, yes, that's right. Back to the Future. Yes, that is one of my favorite movies.
You have the tattoo. I hope it is.
I have the tattoo. Yes, I have the tattoo. Yes. But that's not one I necessarily think of when I'm like top 3 favorite movies. I think like my top 3 on any given day would be like Boogie Nights, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Wow.
Natural Born Killers. So
wow.
Yeah. So Willy Wonka is one that I'd really love to do on this podcast, because I think there's a lot to be said about Willy Wonka, the capitalist business owner, and the way his dangerous fucking factory that just puts all of these children in danger. Also, the Oompa Loompas. What the fuck is going on there? Are they there? Are they there consensually? Are they being held there? Are they being compensated at all for their work? Like this, it really seems like maybe a borderline on a slave situation. So I think we
have to do it. There's so much. I always think about that image of them sharing, the whole family sharing that one bed.
Oh, yeah. All the grandparents.
Yes. And, we'll have to do it as we lead up to Timotei's
Oh, yeah. Wonka.
I mean, I think we can do we'll have to do it leading up to that. I mean, I guess we'll have to see that. I'm terrified.
I have just like such morbid curiosity around that movie.
And I bet they're banking on a lot of our freaking morbid curiosity at this point to like get the box office.
That movie could be one of the highest grossing movies of the year, or it could be a complete flop, and neither would surprise me. All right, what are some of your favorite movies, and how would you discuss them on the podcast? I'm
notoriously I love saying that when we were like, I'm notoriously, I'm like, amongst you.
Amongst you and your partner, Tommy.
Honestly, amongst my brain and like all the people living it. I am terrible at favorites. Like as soon as I get a favorite question, I'm going to think of them all later, but I know I have a list somewhere. But what came to mind, one movie that really impacted me, and I remember its impact deeply, this movie, Under the Skin, starring ScarJo. Did you ever see it?
I never have, but I've heard that it's very, very good.
Oh my gosh. It's so good. And I think I've always been really into, probably because I also made a movie like this, like hybrid documentary. I wouldn't even call it documentary, but hybrid reel. Like she really went around and tried to solicit people. I think it takes place in Scotland. So there's a mix of this weird hybrid, but it's also an alien story. Sorry to spoil. I mean, like that's not a spoiler, but she's basically this woman. It just said so much about the human condition, and I remember both times watching it, and I hope we do it on the pod to watch it again, like just sobbing uncontrollably because it said so much about the experience of being like in a human vessel, particularly about being a woman in a human vessel, and it was just so well done. It blew my mind. I love that movie.
Like how women are like regularly subjected to objectification, stuff like that.
Yes, but it's so well done that it's not, you don't, like, I didn't realize the impact or any of the themes. It's not like one of those movies where you're like, it was very emotional for me watching, and it's super sci-fi. There's very minimal dialogue. It's like very simple story. There's a little horror in it. Yeah, I just really recommend it. I loved it. So that really impacted me, I think, in terms of what you can do with cinema. I wouldn't say that's a favorite, but it was really impactful. And then I guess my other one that I would really want to do on this pod, but is kind of obscure, so people would have to be willing to watch it if they've never seen it. But the late 90s flick, or maybe early 90s, or maybe, I don't know, Trading Mom, starring Sissy Spacek and Anna Chlumsky.
Okay.
Have you never seen it?
No.
Okay, during the pandemic, I guess you were not part of it, but I remember a few of our virtual pod cohort, we rewatched it because this was also a very impactful on me as a young child. Sissy Spacek plays, first of all, multiple characters. I can't say they're all great, but it is quite the acting tour de force.
Okay.
Because essentially it's these kids who are like, we hate our mom. Which I just feel like you could relate to at that age where you're like, oh my gosh, this person makes me so angry. So they literally go to the mommy market where they try out a few new moms. And like Sissy Spacek plays all the different moms. There's a clown mom. So there's clearly some kind of analysis about like the marketplace. Literally, it's a marketplace for mommies and how we relate to our parental figures in the United States.
Yeah, especially considering that, like raising children is often considered to be like not labor, like not a job. And, the entire scam of the nuclear family and the sole breadwinner was that, well, then there will be a mom who's going to do all of this free labor, raising the children, raising and educating and producing the next generation of workers to be exploited, and like how that is completely disregarded in the way that labor is valued, especially like parental labor and child rearing. So
totally.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
One of the moms they get is like the maid mom that they just want her to pick up after them. And then again, like the circus mom. Yeah. So that also impacted me. I'm not going to say Trading Mom is my favorite movie. But that's what came to mind.
All right, next question. Gavin writes, do you think Hollywood can move away from business moguls? I ask this because I aspire to create entertainment in the future, and from my perspective, it feels like these corporate goons like David Zaslav are responsible for the decline of modern cinema, mainly the lack of original stories. Is it possible for creatives to take control of the industry soon? Wow, great fucking question, Gavin.
Feel you, Gavin.
Feel you big time, Gavin. Wow, I think this is like a multifaceted question. I think as much as like as much attention gets paid to like the David Zaslavs or the Ted Sarandoses or the whoever the CEOs or studio heads are at any given time, there is also like there's like, you know, there's boards of directors, there are shareholders, there are other executives who all contribute to how these studios or these networks or these streamers, what sort of creative decisions they go in. So I don't think it's totally fair to say like it's solely the fault of like a David Zaslav, because these people are just reacting to what the market is already doing. I think speaking to this idea about like lack of original stories, you know, if the Marvel movies weren't so bankable and the Marvel movies didn't make so much money, then they would have stopped making so many Marvel movies. But it's just like that's what the market rewarded. So in turn, we have seen, you know, just so much of Hollywood's energy being poured into like these franchises or or intellectual property.
I'm gonna push back a little.
Okay.
Because I think you don't mean to be doing it, but I'm like, wow, you're making capitalism seem like it's like it is that charitable, if you know what I mean. Like it's like somehow like it's because the Marvel movies are so good that they're just winning the capital game. I think a lot of these places just don't even give other kinds of media a try. So we don't even know if it could be popular. I think that's kind of the big pushback on, you know, again, getting any form of representation for anyone or anyone working other than white men in these films. I think it was like 3% of directors and writers were Latino, and like, but there's no evidence to say that's not because the market wants that. So I do think that there's more complexity to like, we also prime and prep the market. So I do think, does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And I that's a good pushback, and I'll clarify that I don't think the market rewards necessarily things that are good or that are like great cinema. I think the market, and then and it's also like a negative feedback loop. It's like, you know, they put out more superhero movies, so people pay to go see the superhero movies, and then they get the money, and they're like, well, they must really like the superhero movies, so let's do more of those superhero movies. Yeah,
like if they put a Barbenheimer campaign behind a Boots Riley film,
yeah,
you know what I mean. I'm like, it probably do really well. I don't think they want that.
But that's the thing with like the market and the way that these studios operate, is that they're basically risk assessment managers. Right. Like that's really like, you know, from working in Hollywood for a decade and like meeting with development people whose jobs at studios is to like to meet with writers and be like, hey, what are your ideas for a movie or TV show? You know, sometimes those people have a creative background. Sometimes they know what they're talking about in terms of writing and story structure. But more times than not, they're saying, you know, based on our research, audiences are looking for Ted Lasso, or audiences are looking for the new Wednesday on Netflix. They're reacting solely to what the market is dictating and don't push for original ideas or original stories or, you know, stories from non-white perspectives, because they're just assessing risk. And that's so limiting in the way that our media is created. Is if like you're just looking at numbers and you're like, well, this is the least risky investment for us, then it's obviously going to push to the front like less interesting, less dynamic, less varied stories. So yeah, so I say it's the market, but I mean that in a pejorative sense. I'm not saying like, of course.
And I think in here there's also a bigger question of, I would even push to say, like, what is it that a Hollywood career, when we even say Hollywood, you know, like what does a quote unquote mainstream career mean or look like, or why is that even what's desirable? If it's about, and this is just me talking because I have this conversation with myself all the time, particularly as an artist, and I found it like when that was the carrot, when that was the dream, it was inherently uncreative and restraining and had like a chokehold on me, because I remember from very early on recognize like the calling to be an artist had nothing to do with the mainstream part of it or the even the amount of visibility you would get. Let's say it's the visibility that you are seeking with it, and you being the me, you know, the proverbial you. that you're seeking from all of that is like, I remember early on being like, well, in order to do the thing I love, I guess I have to get famous because like they only seem to be handing over careers to those people, the roles that I would want to play or this that I would want to play. And breaking free from that model, I think, is starting to recognize like you really do have to build it for yourself. And what's remarkable is you see people build it for themselves. You see the Michaela Coles, you see the Phoebe Waller-Bridges, you see people who just were like, I had a story I wanted to tell and I built it and I built the audience around it. And then Hollywood will come in and be like, yeah, we can make this mainstream. But that's just because, like you were saying, they're like, oh, I see there's a market that surrounds you. And then, of course, as we watch those courageous creators, like what their sort of task at hand becomes is how do they hold on and maintain alliance to an alignment with their original creative impulses. And I think we can watch versions of that where it's really phenomenal, like a Michaela Cole, or watch where it falls apart. So I don't know if that, I feel like it just kind of, there's inside of there is like, why do we care about Hollywood moving away? What about building stuff outside of it? And to that, I would also say there's a lot of the models that are starting, like Means TV, doing its own cooperative structure and being worker owned. Or I want to put in a plug for Art Co-op, who is a network of artists and groups that make the solidarity economy irresistible. That's their line. But they have a really great, and this might be good for you, Gavin. I started to take it and I loved it. They have on here, they have a class about the solidarity economy for artists, particularly.
Ooh.
Really cool stuff there. So I would say also looking outside of, like, I think part of it would be also like trying to stop change Hollywood and trying to make something outside of it that becomes the marketable choice, that becomes what, if we're sticking to the market idea, or that that kind of market crashes, but it becomes like where people want to go because it's irresistible.
Yes, that's such a good way of putting it. I often use this example for, when I'm like talking to like family members or whatever about socialism and how like a cooperative structure works. And the example I use is like, okay, imagine you're, getting your first job. Let's say it's a restaurant job, whatever, any industry. Over on one side is a restaurant that's owned by one person. They keep all of the profits. Everyone works for them, and they just get a wage. And then over here is a restaurant where every employee owns a piece of the restaurant. You share all the profits. You share, everyone has their jobs, but everyone votes democratically on how the restaurant is run. Which one would you want to work in? And people are often like, I mean, I guess like, when you put it that way, like the one where I get to own stuff and share in profits and have a say in how it's run. So I think that's so important. Is just these structures need to be built in order for people to see how they work and the value in them, and then making them irresistible in that way. So thank you, Gavin.
Next question. Chelsea asks, how do you think working as actors has affected both of your outlooks about the entertainment industry?
Oof. I could take this first if you want to simmer on it. I mean, we've talked about it before, but we went to theater school where all we were doing was practicing our craft for the love and the passion of it and the enjoyment of it, and to stretch ourselves and grow ourselves as artists. And then at least for me, as soon as I made the transition to then being an actor and writer in Hollywood, I immediately felt like I needed to commodify myself. But I didn't have the terminology for that. I didn't know what it was. I just know that it felt like shitty that I had to sell myself constantly, and I hated it. And then like everything, like you said earlier, like, as a writer, it really inhibited my sense of creativity, because at a certain point I stopped creating stuff that I just wanted to make, and stuff that and started making stuff that I thought people wanted to see from me, or things that would be more marketable or saleable, because that was the way into actually getting a career. And those were some of the most creatively stifling moments of my creative career. And then it was the times that I was just like, fuck it, I'm just going to do this thing for me, that I actually ended up having the most career success. And then ultimately for me, I decided, like, look, I love creating. I love being an artist. I love making stuff, but like, I don't need to prove myself in the ecosystem of Hollywood and get the quote unquote job, like the big job that like gets you in the club and allows you to quit your day jobs, because I was trying to appease an industry or break into an industry that doesn't honestly have a lot of value or respect for creatives, to be totally bluntly. And I have a very cynical view of Hollywood for a lot of those reasons. It is, at the end of the day, it is a business, and they are in the business of making money. And unless you have figured out a way to make them money, then you're not going to have a ton of opportunities in Hollywood. So that was kind of my experience.
Yeah. I don't know. What's coming to mind is just, I feel so privileged. This doesn't contradict, I think, what you were saying about the Hollywood economy, but like, I know you probably feel this way too. Like, I think it's a deep privilege to be an actor. And we wouldn't be talking about movies, weekly if we didn't both feel this way. Like, I just think it's such an unbelievable craft. The craft of stepping into a human experience and using your body and your voice and your mind and your emotional life to give an audience an opportunity to practice their own humanity in order to maybe feel new things, be radicalized themselves into healing or new ways of thinking or being. I just think it's a total privilege. And I also feel that the economy of acting, the economy of Hollywood, I'm not going to say acting, but the economy of Hollywood as it exists could easily steal that very noble privilege. And I personally found, moving back to New York, it was like, maybe that's because there's just closer to the stage. Like, I found like a restored sense of like, this is why I love doing what I love doing. And I'm motivated and inspired by the idea that like not being inside the Hollywood economy doesn't necessarily mean you're not acting or you're not an actor, that there's so many ways to practice this craft. And I guess it's also top of mind as we're just at this place of recognizing like there's going to be such a shift in what it means to quote unquote work because of AI and work as an actor, and just how the economy of acting has changed so drastically, where we've said this before, you used to be able to be like a working actor, and now you can do just as much labor as an actor and still have to have other jobs because of streaming and now because of AI. I guess that is how, what was the original question was like, how does that affect our outlook on the entertainment industry? It just makes me feel both hopeful and sad.
I think that's totally fair. And you're absolutely right. It's completely different than being a working actor is completely different than how it used to be. I remember the first national commercial I booked, which is like, that's a decent paycheck for an actor. I remember one of the older actors on set was like, what are you guys going to do with your commercial money? I think I'm going to buy another house. Every time I book a national, I just buy another house. But he was talking about like an economy that didn't exist anymore. And I was like, that's fucking incredible that used to be how it worked.
Fun fact about both Frank and I's actors. We both have screen tested for Young and the Restless.
That is... Yes, we have. I just couldn't take it seriously. I just was like, can I just be goofy? And they're like, no, be sexy. And I was like, I don't know how to do that.
That is
just like, I just want to be goofy.
I got very, very, very close to booking that, and I remember knowing like this doesn't feel aligned, but also like it's just of being like, wow, what would my life would be? So I mean, I think I'm allowed to say like the contract was awful in terms of just money and like what it would,
Sure.
Just like what it would mean for one's life. And yet, because of the economy, these are the choices actors have to make all the time.
All right, our next question. Jared asks, what is the best book on critical film analysis / theory for someone just getting into it? I can't, no books come to mind specifically about like critical film theory. I've started reading a couple of the Harlan Ellison and Neil Postman essays that Josh Olson recommended on our network episode in terms of media criticism and TV criticism. But whenever I'm looking for analysis or theory on a movie, especially if we're researching it, I'll just Google search, Ants movie anti-capitalism or Ants movie socialism, and just kind of see what comes up. I find that there's a lot of good analysis just on the internet in essay form or in long read form. But I don't have any specific books like about like critical film theory.
So yeah, one that a lot of people look at for media is Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher. Not specifically about film, but talks a lot about film. Some of the movies that we talked about already, like Children of Men. I think we reference a lot of Mark Fisher in that conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say the same. Not necessarily. I think what's fun about the podcast is sometimes reading a book like the one that I was reading about mutual aid, but then being able to find, you're reading something and then you're seeing something in a movie and it's sort of connective tissue there. Mm-hmm. There's another great book I just started that our guest Chris Myers had recommended a while back called Elite Capture: How the Powerful Took Over Identity Politics and Everything Else by Olufemi Otai. I hope I'm saying their name right. Taiwo. And that also is like, things about, generally, I guess it's books about media in general. I mean, because that's all, then you start to really get into the identity politics of media. And yeah, I also can't think of a specific one about film, but if you find one, please, or if listeners, please write them in. We're always into listening to reading more stuff. Okay. Ben asks, are you going to do an episode on Andor?
Wow, Ben, a person after my own heart. That it's tough. Andor is a TV series. For those that don't know, it's set in the Star Wars universe. It's, I think, 10 episodes. So yeah, I guess there's just some practical questions of, having to watch 10 hours of something just to do an episode on it. So that's a little tough. Although I have had the thought of doing Andor as like a premium miniseries or something. But I've talked to you about Andor. It's unbelievable. And it's filled with contradictions because it's like an unbelievable story about revolution and like what revolutions entail on a granular level, and like revolutionary theory and revolutionary leaders and radicalization and fucking imperialism and fascism and all of these things. Meanwhile, it is packaged in the Star Wars universe and produced by the Walt Disney Corporation. So, so it's like amazing that this story was shoehorned by this giant corporate media conglomerate.
And that's where a book like Elite Capture: How the Powerful Took Over Identity Politics and Everything Else comes in really helpful to explain all of that.
So Ben, no immediate plans, but I would love to do something on Andor at some point. Maybe when it comes back at the end of next year, we can do something. All right, friend of the pod, Harvey JK asks, what deceased figure from the 20th century would you most like to have on the podcast to discuss a film? And what film would you want him or her to discuss with you?
I have mine. I'll jump in. And while on the surface, this might seem like a basic answer, it is not. Because I am the all-time fan, and she's a real radical. I'm talking Marilyn Monroe. I would love to have her on the pod. For anyone who doesn't really know much about her past being, one of the most famous movie stars, women in the world, she was also deeply radical, came from working class background, had really radical politics. I didn't know this, but in the 60s, I just found this out. She became a founding member of the Hollywood branch of the Committee for a Sane Nuclear Policy. She was pro-Castro. She was like, even on the set of like All About Eve, she was warned
not know any of this.
Not to be seen by studio executives reading radical books. Oh yeah, she was deeply radical. There's like also some thoughts about, how that may have possibly had to do with how she passed, But she was in the, and this came to mind too, because we started the conversation about the current sort of mirroring of this blacklist. She was never blacklisted, but definitely threatened and definitely around a lot of folks who were threatened or were blacklisted. And she was just, I think, badass for that. And like definitely today, would be fired. Would be let go of a picture or two, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Canceled. So I would definitely, I'd love to have Marilyn on. And in terms of the movie, I think Some Like It Hot would be a great film to discuss. Of course, there's like a lot that I would be really curious too about where she probably her thoughts and growth on sort of the trans rights issues of all with that film. And then they I think redid that as a music. There'd be a lot to discuss. It's also, I love her in that movie.
That's a great answer. And I did not know any of that stuff about Marilyn Monroe. So thank you for educating me. My answer, and this is maybe like a little selfish, but I would really love to speak with David Graeber, who passed away only a few years ago in 2020. David Graeber was an anthropologist and an anarchist theorist. Some of his favorite books are Bullshit Jobs and The Dawn of Everything. A really brilliant, wonderful, charming, funny, sweet theorist and, philosopher in some ways. And if you've never seen any clips of David Graeber speaking, I highly recommend it, either on YouTube or TikTok or wherever. But he just has such a mild and plain way of putting these really large concepts in very, very common sense ways. And when you hear him talk, it's like almost impossible to disagree with him about anything. And just like the way he speaks about these ideas. And he's just one of my favorite speakers, writers, and would absolutely love the chance to speak with him. In terms of movies, I don't know, maybe something about like society, something big. Maybe, it's a really great movie, or it's not a great movie, it's an okay movie, but it has a great premise, is the film Elysium. With Matt Damon, which we've talked about maybe off mic before, but this Matt Damon sci-fi action movie from maybe like a decade ago about this dystopian future where Earth is just garbage planet, just completely covered in garbage, no food, no crops, climate change has ravaged it, and then it's like all the poor people live on Earth, but all of the rich people live in Elysium, which is a satellite that orbits Earth. Has a lot to say about class and elitism, and then also the future and climate change and everything. Something broad scale and something that he could really apply a large societal analysis. That would be something I'd want to talk with David Graeber about.
That's a good one. Okay, so our next question comes from Allison. What has been the most surprising analysis since the start of the podcast? And do you now engage in Marxist analysis in every movie you watch?
Ooh.
Great question.
Most surprising?
Mine was Dude, Where's My Car?
I was going to say the same thing. Mainly because I had no idea where our guest, Devin Young, was going to take the conversation. And I was just like, it was one of those situations where it was like, whoa, I've literally never thought about it this way before.
Yeah, and I think it expanded how I like to look for different theories now, different analysis now, that what that was like, here's a way to sort of reappropriate something that is clearly very harmful in the way that so many movies from that time were. And it's not denying that, but it's also like, here's a fun way to particularly be like, here's like the queer analysis. Like, this is actually like all the things that like on the surface it might not be. And it was really fun. And now I like to look at movies like, what else could be in here? Yeah, just this is what, I don't know. Sometimes I think films, when we're watching them, I'm like, here's something that really impacted how I grew up. And like, I'm interested in looking at that lens and like, how did it shape my generation or this particular generation and others. Yeah, it's fun to look maybe too deep in.
I love getting to look at films through this lens because it's just a totally different way of engaging with entertainment. Because I can, and to answer like do I always analyze films like this now, like it in varying degrees. I think I just have I'm just more critical now, and not just of films. I'm critical of everything that I ingest, politics, media, or otherwise. But sometimes, I turn it off and I'm like, I'm just gonna try to like lay back and watch this as pure entertainment. But it's just kind of like always on. Another really surprising one I just wanted to mention was You've Got Mail. Simply because I hadn't seen it in such a long time, and rewatching it, I was just like, this is such a horrific movie. The way that Tom Hanks's character treats Meg Ryan's character is really shocking. All right, and our final question comes from...
And wait, the last part of that question was, do you engage in Marxist analysis in every movie you watch? I guess we sort of answered it. No, not always, but if it comes up, I would say.
All right, and final question. A friend of the show, Branson Reese, who did our Clerks episode with us, wrote, what's a film you love despite its dogshit politics? And you can't say On the Waterfront. I honestly don't remember a ton about On the Waterfront. I haven't seen that since
we should do it on the pod. It's a great film.
I know it's a great film. I don't remember it at all. Okay, as soon as I read this question, I immediately had my answer.
What is it?
It's so embarrassing. One of my favorite movies is, I think it's from like 1998, 1999, the comedy Basketball, starring Trey Parker and Matt Stone, the creators of South Park. It was right when South Park was super hot, and Hollywood was like, South Park is huge. You guys should be the leads of a movie. And it's a movie about a fake sport called basketball, which merges baseball and basketball together. I haven't rewatched it in a while, but just in my memory, I know there's a ton of misogynistic jokes. There's a ton of sexism. There's a ton of homophobic jokes. There's maybe some like decent stuff about how like, I don't know, business moguls co-opt sports or whatever. But if I put that movie on with my partner, we'd get like 10 minutes into it and she'd be like, I can't fucking watch this. This is awful. And I would be like, you're right. A lot of this is completely unacceptable. But you know what? That's still in my heart. I'm like, that's one of my favorite movies. You know, there's a lot of terrible stuff in that movie, but like, I'm sure if I watched it, I would still get a kick out of the stuff that wasn't extremely problematic or offensive.
Well, I'm going to say, I mean, I can't think of the thing that popped into my mind that like just addresses this. It's not a movie, but like, and if you listen to our Josh Olson episode, you'll know why this is funny. Like, I stan the West Wing. Ooh, I love the West Wing. The worst politics. Oh.
I did not know that you actually like loved the West Wing.
I love everything. What's his face?
Aaron Sorkin.
Yeah. Like, I don't think you could get more. I mean,
wow.
Yeah, I love Aaron Sorkin. Love.
Damn, this is a good answer for this because he does have dog shit politics.
And if Aaron Sorkin has a freaking show, I am eating it up, watching it twice. Like the pace, and I'm aware like Patty Chayefsky, yeah, probably a better rep. Like I love it. And then I'd say movie, maybe. I don't know if this is dog shit politics. Actually, as I thought about it, I was like, we should do it. It's just like I love anything that's like that 80s cell phone rich. You know what I'm talking about? That 80s aesthetic, that Diet Coke got a cell phone, very Ghostbusters, but I like the extreme, like Die Hard in a way, but The Family Man with Nick Cage, that is like one of my favorite holiday movies.
Yeah.
And it is not got good politics, but it would be really good to talk about. We should actually, we have to do that on the pod.
That's the movie where Nick Cage is like a successful executive and then wakes up and he like makes a wish that he's like, well, I wonder what it would have been like if I'd stayed together with my girlfriend. And then it's like he wakes up and he's got a family and it's like an alternate reality. It's an alternate timeline.
Yeah, Don Cheadle kind of plays like the magic black. It's like got all the terrible tropes. He's like the magic black man who's like comes in. It's fucking directed by Brett Ratner.
Oh, God.
It's adapted.
Okay.
Actually, it's like adapted from It's a Wonderful Life. So it's just like, and it's Nick Cage. It's just like, it's gross, it's cringe, but I love it. I love it because it's just got that, I like that vibe of like, yeah, like Wall Street, drinking Cokes, making money. Like, there should be a name for, like, you know, we should need a word for that. Tinsel. Like, to me, that's like tinsel.
Okay, yeah, just like shiny and fake. Just like shiny and fake.
Yes, and I love
probably
tinsel.
Causes cancer.
Probably gonna kill your dog or your cat, you know?
Mm-hmm. All right, that is all of the questions. Thank you again to everyone who wrote in. I was pleasantly surprised to see we got such a nice response.
Yeah, this was really fun. I didn't know of this concept of mailbag until now.
Yeah, I kept pitching mailbag episode to Rivka, and she kept being like, okay, I don't know what that is. I don't have any context for that.
Yeah.
We will be back next week with a new movie episode. We will be watching Ben Stiller's 2001 comedy Zoolander. But in the meantime, if you want to support this show, you can go to nvcpod.com to become a supporter. That gives you access to our premium episodes. Leave a rating review, help us out on the podcast player. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok. And other than that, we will talk to you next week.
Talk to you next week.
Bye.
Bye.